like this. It's derived from the revealed aspect of what we see in Christology. And so there's no real way to diagnose man's problem and to understand man and man's anthropology, as I said, without the right theology. Logos is the icon of the Father, and man is the icon of God. We are the image of God.
Dire Wave
3.
Dire wave.
3.
The arts reflects the soul, the spirit of a people. Architecture reflects the soul, the spirit of a people.
All right, welcome.
And so therefore you can see the degeneracy,
How are y'all doing?
you can see the degradation
Turn this music off.
and the loss of aesthetic.
I regret to inform you that we have retired the boomer chair. And I also regret to inform you that it was not actually the contributions to the boomer chair which replaced the boomer chair, because there weren't really enough contributions to replace the boomer chair. Welcome, Father Deacon. And we will have some other people joining us as well.
Hello. Sorry.
Welcome. How are you?
I'm doing good.
Good. Do you see that we have this snaz purple couch now? So
Oh my gosh.
now that you got, when you guys ramble, I can just like sit back and kind of doze off when you guys start rambling. So the boomer chair got replaced because that was a nightmare. I hope everyone understands the penance that I went through sitting in that horrible lawn chair for the last year and a half to do countless hours of live streams. And now we have this comfortable, flashy Hollywood purple chair that we have. Some might even say it's a little on the fabulous side. I don't know. But Jamie was involved in helping me pick it out. I said, we need something, something with a little pizzazz to it. Can't be a dang brown chair. It can't be, earth tone. It's got to have pizzazz. Anyway, how are you?
Doing good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I think we're going to have a couple of the Discord friends will be joining us. We'll have perhaps Snek, David the Real Medwipe, and David, of course, did a video that I shared. We've all been kind of eager to get into this topic because, as everybody knows, just a little bit of background. We know that the pontificate of Francis has been tumultuous, to say the least. It's been a rocky, difficult time for those in the world of Roman Catholicism. It's not a world that I've been in for many years, probably about 10 or 11 years or more. And in the world of Roman Catholicism, before Francis took office, everybody probably has some idea of the attempt to reconcile the Society of St. Pius X and many of the Latin Mass goers back to what they call full union with the See of Rome, the Bishop of Rome. And one of the ways that this was attempted, as Francis himself put into his letter yesterday, or the day before, whenever it was, that the motu proprio of Benedict XVI had the intention of reconciling the SSPX. So what has happened, of course, is that the last several years did not ultimately result in a full restoration of communion on the part of the Society of St. Pius X to Rome. Francis even mentions that it was, in fact, schism. So we all should know very clearly that the SSPX was and is in schism. In fact, there would not be such a thing as the FSSP if it was not in schism, because the group of people who reconciled to Rome are called the Fraternal Society of St. Peter, and they are not the same as the Society of St. Pius X. So whatever Society of St. Pius X people tell you, it is not the case that they are in communion with Rome. despite what Rome. So it's what Rome decides who's in communion with Rome, not you.
Right.
You can't just say, "Oh, I'm in communion with Rome," and they don't accept us, but I'm in communion with Rome because, as we will see, I will show you that canon law, and even more so clearly in Vatican I, you have to accept, as well as Casti Connubii, by the way, we'll see from Pope Pius XII, you have to accept the Roman sees, and that includes the congregations, their juridical decisions, as well as their disciplinary decisions, and that includes liturgical decisions. So you don't actually have the right to decide on your own interpretation, private interpretation, that you believe Rome is no longer faithful or has deviated. In fact, no man judges the first see. It is not your job to judge the deviations of the first see. The first see is the teacher and universal pastor of all Christians. So according to Vatican I, it cannot deviate in terms of what it promulgates for the entire church. And that includes the disciplinary, liturgical, doctrinal decisions, as we will see from Denzinger in a moment. But so just to kind of close out on this point of the situation. So what has happened now, of course, Benedict has restricted the celebrations of the Latin Mass to getting bishops' permission. And the reason that this is such a big deal is that it kind of puts things back to the way they were before the motu proprio of Benedict XVI.
That's right, yeah.
Allowing for the Latin Mass to be celebrated without permission of the bishop. And the reason that it's a big deal, of course, is that the bishops tend to be, on the whole, for the most part, liberal, obviously. Nobody admits this. This is not controversial. And so as a result of that, they do not typically give permission for this because, as we'll see, definitely post-Vatican II, there is a war on at least what Rome considers tradition. Ironically, to be technical here, the Latin Tridentine Mass is not traditional. In fact, it accrued many traditions. It is not absolutely identical to the ancient Gregorian and other Western variations. In basic structure, yes, there is a Latin Gregorian rite that even the Orthodox Church celebrates, sure. But to be clear, in the mind of many Roman Catholics, especially after the document called Quo Primum, that's the Tridentine papal document outlining you cannot ever change, deviate from this Mass. It's pretty explicit, pretty dogmatic, and a lot of trads don't even know that Pius X, their hallowed pope, actually made liturgical alterations to dates of Easter, prayers, and things celebrated during the Easter liturgy for the West. So already the revolution of Vatican II was actually prepared in the earlier centuries of liturgical alteration and change that had begun about 60 or 70 years earlier than Vatican II. So it's not actually a new thing. There was a large academic movement at that time about ressourcement, going back to the early liturgical practices, and eventually admitting many things that Orthodoxy never lost, right? That the liturgy was typically in the vernacular, right? The Latin Mass, the reason it was Latin is the same reason that Jerome translated the Vulgate, because it was the vulgar language, right? It was always supposed to be in the vernacular. And then, of course, at the time of the Reformation and in documents like Auctorem Fidei, the banning of vernacular was done because it was seen as a way to counteract the Reformation criticisms. That just begs the question of, well, maybe the Hussites, maybe the Reformation critics had some things correct. Maybe it should be in the vernacular. And in fact, it always used to be. That's the point, right? So it's not a simple black and white issue here. We're going to be looking at this obviously from the Orthodox perspective ultimately. But so that's the background here. And the last thing I'll say is that having been a longtime attendee of the Latin Mass in the Society of St. Pius X back in the 2000s, I have a sense of how this works and how this goes down, and I can speak to kind of direct experience of this. And then I went, about 3 or 4 weeks ago, we had one of my good longtime Uniate friends become accepted in the ROCOR Western Rite. So we had one of my friends join the Orthodox Church finally after many years of going back and forth with me on that issue. But thank God him and his family came into Orthodoxy. And so I got to see firsthand the Latin Mass, for many years. and then seeing first. And I've been to diocesan Latin masses as well. I've been to Fraternal Society of St. Peter Latin masses back when I was a traditional Catholic. So I know that world pretty good, and I got to see the Rocourt Western Rite as well. And there are noticeable differences. I mean, you can clearly see that the Rocourt Western Rite reflects a much more ancient tradition that's a little scaled down in terms of all of the some of the excesses. And then, of course, it was vernacular, as it should be, right? That's the point here, is that the vernacular really is the ancient tradition, that people should be hearing the liturgy in their language. There's nothing wrong with that. That's the tradition. So, ironically, the trads are not traditional. That's the funny thing here. But when you hinge everything on the Pope and the Pope's decrees, this is actually where we come to all of these problems and issues. We see this with, Matt Fradd now sharing Taylor Marshall stuff. Does that mean that Matt Fradd is leaning towards the SSPX? Again, we're going to show today that the SSPX is technically in schism. They are not a reconciled group, no matter what they say, because it's not the group that makes that decision. It's Rome that makes that decision. So here we are now. A lot of trads are upset. And one reason they're upset is that you might think, well, what about Pachamama? What about Fratelli Tutti? In the trad mindset, and I can speak from experience, the typical attitude is to just huddle down, and just do the Latin Mass, and we'll let those problems fix themselves, right? We're going to ignore what comes out of Rome. It's constant nonsense and troubles. Let's just hunker down and trust that if we just keep doing the Mass, things will get fixed. But the problem, of course, is that for the lay people, that's the direct way to really get them upset, to really dishearten them, and to really attack them, is to actually go after that Mass. Because the lay people aren't sitting around reading and worried about typically the latest encyclical of the Vatican II popes. But it does hit home when you go after the Latin Mass, and that's why so many Roman Catholics are once again distraught, and they're distraught again for good reason. I went through the years of cycles of this distraught, anxiety-ridden situation of trying to make the Roman Catholic system work. And the reason we're doing this stream today is because it's such a huge issue. Everybody's basically streaming and talking about it. And really, it's just an illustration of ultimately why the problem with the Roman Catholic Church isn't so much Vatican II, but actually it's Vatican I. You couldn't have Vatican II without Vatican I, because it's really the Renaissance humanism that St. Justin Popovich talked about. So that's my opening salvo there. I'll leave it to Father Deacon or David the Real Medwhite. I don't know if Snek's here. Yes, so Snek's here as well.
Just give me 1 second. I'll be right back, Jake.
Okay, that's fine. So, David, I know you did a video. You want to give your initial assessment?
Before I start, I have a question. Can the people in the stream see the camera right now? Because, Jay, all of those arguments you made, they're cool, but you don't have the keys, man. So I have the keys though, so I can make arguments. Anyways,
those look like Playmobil keys, like keys. I picture the papal, like the Pope Mobile, actually has Playmobil keys. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, sure. I made a 10-minute video. It's quite short on this situation, the observations that I had for the time. Before I move on to that, I want to kind of comment on the vernacular thing, because I definitely agree with the point on vernacular liturgy, but what the Novus Ordo is doing is, on the face of it, it's vernacularization. That's the kind of idea, but it's not. It is not vernacularization. It's simplification. It is a dumbing down of the worship. So when we want vernacularization, we don't want it to be like the kind of language we use when we talk to our friends, but rather some kind of serious language, classical language as well. That's why the kind of Latin aspect of the Mass, even though it's not vernacular, it has that classical aspect to it. That's why we want, in English liturgies, we want classical English, not like classical English to the point where no one understands what's going on, but classical English, like King James English, for example,
I
right?
think we want an Ebonics liturgy. We want Ebonics. we want Pidgin.
Pidgin liturgy. Pidgin. Yeah.
We want the Esperanto liturgy.
Yeah. The points that I made in the video, I'm going to kind of summarize them, sure. The observations that I made. The first observation is that the Vatican II spirit is obviously in full force. I think it's undeniable. I think this kind of I think developments like this kind of disproves any need of a debate on whether Vatican II is I mean, the force the Council of Vatican II has is like much powerful than most other ecumenical councils in Roman Catholic history. When that's the case, you kind of have to just say, what's going on over here. Second observation is that the good aspects of the Roman Catholic Church that's left is from us now. Like, they don't have anything on their own left. In 5-10 years, the TLM is just going to get phased out if things go this way. We'll see how it goes, but I think it's just going to be phased out eventually. Maybe we'll see Novus Ordo, some parts of the Novus Ordo Mass becoming more TLM-ish, like TLM light at most. And then what? Like, the most classical reverent form of liturgy you're going to have is from us. And that, I think, has a lot of symbolic meaning behind it, that the good parts of your religion is really from us, and that sends a message to, I think, a lot of trats that they should really come back home. And the third observation that I had, I think it was something akin to, I actually forgot now, but I want to kind of talk more on the second observation, is that, again, sure, you might have Eastern Rite liturgy, but, liturgy and its theology are not separable things. So this is not just some aesthetic museum kind of thing that a lot of trats believe, but it's actually a practical application of the theology. That's what liturgy kind of is. So you can't enjoy Orthodox liturgy without enjoying Orthodox theology. And I think a lot of tracts that talk trash about St. Gregory Palamas are going to eat their words when they witness the second Sunday of Lent in Eastern Rite churches, because that's all about St. Gregory Palamas, the second Sunday of Lent. So I just kind of wonder what's going to happen in the Tradcaf world. It's something that we need to see. But the third observation was the superiority of Orthodox ecclesiological structure. Usually, Tradcaf arguments are about you can't get things done. And my response to that, well, you can't defend those things that you got done, because all you need to do to subvert the central structure is to just take the guy in charge and the rest follows. If you want to subvert the Orthodox Church, certain jurisdictions, that has happened in history, it is happening now, but you're going to have to work a lot harder to actually succeed in what you're doing. We went through the Ottoman conquests. That was a pretty heavy thing in and of itself. I mean, a 1,000-year-old empire just fell. And then the Russian Empire fell because of communist regime. And both of those things fell away, and the Orthodox Church still stands. So not only that, is it kept its doctrines and it defended them, right? We still preserved the Orthodox faith properly, in contrast to the Roman Catholics, for example, which it's kind of interesting because the psychological phenomena has become, they have given up theology and they've just started to just defend the papacy. And that's all they're doing right now. And so they've given up all the aspects of a religion, which just, at this stage, it has become a football team that you want to support, in my opinion. That's what it has devolved into. My football team is better than yours. Our football team is just, we haven't won a cup for 20 years. That's the state of the debate right now. But I don't believe that way. It's not supposed to be that way. So those are kind of my 2 cents for the moment on the issue.
Welcome to the stream, Snek. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Interesting news from Rome this month. And if I were to comment on this this motu proprio, I'd say that first of all, this is the end of the pragmatic argument. The classic argument is being made. Look, one head is easier. We can implement things. It's easier to defend tradition and everything. And now tradition is getting gutted, because, as David said, the liturgy expresses things.
Right.
And before we go into discussing why it's terrible what's happening with this mass being restricted, we should understand that even the details of the mass, or the more pedantic things, as some Roman Catholics have commented, when I was defending some aspects of the liturgy are important. I'm just going to give an example that's very old. The idea of ad orientem, that is being towards the Orient, towards the East. That's something you can see in pretty much every church that is traditional, that's been built traditionally. It's built on the same model and the same plans as the temple, which itself is built like the tabernacle, and which itself tries to replicate the Garden of Eden. And the idea of looking east is not just a detail, it's a testimony of our faith. It's a testimony that we are looking to enter the Garden of Eden just like we left it. As St. Basil said, we pray towards the east because it is a long-lost fatherland. So in doing that, we affirm, well, creation. We affirm that we are from Adam, that we have a specific human nature that was created by God. And we affirm that we want to go back to this original state, to this real, true, physical and spiritual Eden. And that's something that was present in the Latin Mass and is not present in the Novus Ordo. So small details like this do matter. And that's what is called the lex credendi, lex orandi. Lex orandi, lex credendi. So the laws that we hear, that we listen to, and that we live is the laws that we believe in. And we'll see how that's relevant to this document. So first of all, we have to say that it's really sad because it's a part of tradition, and it puts the Roman Catholic mindset in a position where it will have to say, look, the fact that the Pope can, so tradition proves the Pope, and the Pope is the protector of tradition, and actually being able to hurt or harm or change tradition proves the Pope. That's a defense you're going to hear. The main defense you're going to hear in the future month about this is people are going to say, look, the Tridentine Mass already was, there's a decrease of Trent that established that the Tridentine Mass already destroyed other Latin rites that were very old and traditional. So that's a defense you're going to hear. And that's really sad. We'll probably comment on all the groups and what's going to happen. But before all that, I just want to say to all the traditional-minded Catholics, the writing was on the wall. And this is not a display of triumphalism. This is not a told you so moment. This is just telling you, look, what you're looking for, that is authentic Christianity, we have it. And there's no reason not to embrace it. Rome recognizes all of our sacraments as valid. If we have Christ, how can one say that we actually need a Pope? Christ is truly present in the Eucharist of every Orthodox church, every Sunday, at every liturgy. Can you really say, look, he is here, he is truly present, but somehow he who is the life and the truth is not truthful, is not in a church that teaches truth, will not bring you life through the sacrament?
Well, yeah, another admission that I always like to bring up is if Rome admits that the East has maintained their apostolic faith for the last 1,000 years, then isn't that itself proof that the church does not actually need the office of the papacy? And as we're seeing in the last, 70 years, 60 years of post-Vatican II papalism, it's all the more evident that, again, as you pointed out, the supposed practical trump card arguments that the Catholic apologists love to use, that the only way to know right with certitude is to follow the Roman See, the only way to have unity, the only way to have a preservation of the apostolic deposit and tradition is the Roman See. Well, as we can see, even the mainline Roman Catholic apologists like Matt Fradd are having to admit it doesn't look like it's actually doing the thing that it's supposed to do. And I'm not being unfair to...
Doing the opposite.
Right, exactly. I mean, here's Matt Frad's tweet. He says, the future of Catholicism is traditional. It's too bright. I'll put the actual tweet up because we want to comment on this. Now, I mean, the reason I'm bringing this up is because this is just a tacit, again, admission that, I thought that, I mean, Matt's saying this in contrast to what's happened in the last couple of days, right? So this is a recent tweet, and he's saying that tradition is what is the future of Catholicism. But he's saying that in contrast to Rome. In other words, Rome is not following tradition, and whoever follows tradition is going to be the true Catholic. The future Catholicism is traditional. Well, that's just an admission that Rome is not preserving the truth, and Rome is no longer traditional. So the Roman See has essentially, for all practical intents and purposes, has defected. And we're going to see Vatican I is very clear that the Roman See can't defect, and it can't bind the whole church into error.
Yeah, I will add that if you were Orthodox and something like this was happening in our church, you can kind of make that argument, to be honest. But as a Roman Catholic, when your whole system is based on a central structure, I mean, here's the question: if Rome is not traditional, then who is exactly? If the church itself is not traditional, its believers can't be traditional either, because they are in that structure. They are part of that structure. So if there's anything that's tradition, it's the structure itself. And that's the kind of logical mistake behind, I think, that statement is that it always has to be traditional, really, in this system. If you like, I understand that they're going to say something like, we don't say that the Pope always has to do right things. Sure. But when the Pope consistently makes decisions, dogmatic decisions, authoritative decisions against what you deem as tradition, maybe in that worldview, you need to think for yourself and say, well, maybe tradition can subsist outside of the main church. But if that's the case, then you're just completely destroying the idea of the church. And you're just kind of moving into crypto sedevacantism, crypto, I think even Protestantism at that stage. I'm not saying you're Protestant by doing so, but that's the presupposition behind what you're moving. Whereas we can at least say, it's the bishop failing to preserve the tradition, but it's still preserved in the church. Like, for example, with Florence is a great example. A lot of Constantinopolitan bishops failed to keep in with the canons and whatnot, but the laymen held on to it because they are part of the church structure. In the Roman Catholic Church, laymen really aren't that big of a part, to be honest. Mm-hmm. It doesn't seem to be that case.
Father Deacon, did you want to comment?
Yeah, I wanted to bring up, and so what you might be noticing too is an attempt to kind of cope and deal with this, that people will kind of do these red herrings of pointing out the obvious problems that we're having
in
Orthodoxy. Yes, exactly. And I like what David had to say, that, well, first of all, let's just state problems. Just like we say certain things aren't mortal equivalents, there aren't equivalents between Rome, the problems in Rome and the problems in Orthodoxy, precisely because we don't hinge everything on the office of one bishop.
Yep.
We're decentralized. And that, guess what, makes all the difference. But I want to come back to what David said. I thought that's really good. Isn't that amazing and a great testimony to the truth of Orthodoxy, is that despite bishops erring, we preserve the tradition.
Good point.
That's a really good. And so I like that you said that, David.
Well, I want to bring up too, so if we look at the letter that accompanies the motu proprio, Benedict makes very clear that most people understand the motives that prompted John Paul II and Benedict to allow the Roman Missal promulgated by Pius V. And it talks about the fact that this was due to the schism of the movement of Lefebvre, that is the SSPX. So what this shows is that Francis clearly still considers the SSPX in schism. Every SSPX person, of course, rejects this and does not accept that they are in schism. They don't care that Rome continues to hold them in that status. And for them, it's like, well, but we still honor and commune with the Roman See and the Pope in the liturgy, right? Francis is still mentioned in the Mass of the SSPX. But it's not you doing that determines your canonical status or communion with Rome. It's what Rome says. And you'll notice very clearly, again, that this is because of the schism. So they are in schism. It's not going to work to say, well, but we had all these meetings. Yeah, but the meetings don't matter if you don't accept Vatican II. Again, that's why there's an FSSP. And let's see this first point that is often pointed out, which is if you have Denzinger, as you know, this is the sources of Catholic dogma, so everybody should be familiar with this book, especially if you're Roman Catholic. No, contrary to the Kurgan, this is not a man named Ludwig Denzinger, and it's not a guy's opinion. It's just the collection of dogmas according to the Roman Catholic Church, meaning what documents the Roman See has approved for universal magisterial acceptance. And yes, this does constitute the ordinary magisterial teaching. Now, in Denzinger, 1578, we have the condemnation of the Jansenist argument. This is from a document called Auctorum Fidei of Pius VI. And he's one of the post-Tridentine popes who dealt with Jansenists who wanted there to be the Mass done a certain way. I think they even wanted vernacular liturgies. And the Jansenists said, well, if we deem that the Roman See has a bad discipline or liturgical practice, we can legitimately rebel against that. Exact same argument of the Society of St. Pius X. And this proposition number 78, is condemned. So it's a condemned proposition to say that the Roman See can hand down bad disciplines, juridical decisions, or liturgical decisions. The rites are included under this. Now, that's not the only place where we find this. We can go over to Vatican I. And in Vatican I, we've got 3 places under the rulership of Pius IX. This is Denzinger 1683, Denzinger 1792, and Denzinger 1698. And these specify that you must follow, if you're a theologian or even a person not part of the Roman Curia who's disagreeing with Rome, you must follow the decisions of the Roman Pontiff and his See and his congregations in any of their disciplinary, juridical, and liturgical decisions. So you don't have the right to say, this is specifying, you don't have the right to say, well, I've decided that when Rome said that was not part of the extraordinary infallible magisterium, so I'm not going to follow it. All this does is make you a Protestant with the papal documents. That's it, right? I'm going to pick and choose. I'll read through here. Oh, I don't like that one. I like that one. And if we go over to Casti Connubii, which is, again, one of the famous papal encyclicals of Pius XII, if you look at paragraph number 104 in Casti Connubii, this is actually explicitly condemned, again, not just in the Vatican II documents, but in the famous encyclical of Pius XII. And echoing what I just showed you in Denzinger, Pius says that you do not have the right to say, I am only going to follow what I deem as extraordinary teaching. So this gets into the distinction between extraordinary magisterium, which is the Pope defining things from the Roman See for the entire church, or the ordinary universal magisterium, which is the church's teaching of all time for the whole church in all places, anything that she's always taught anywhere and in every place. Now, there is no list, by the way, of what the ordinary universal magisterium is. Again, it's not a coherent, clear principle. That's why you get the canon law, canon theologians who will sit there and give you 10-page lists of how you're supposed to figure out and determine what the different strata are. We've covered that many times. But regardless,
wait a minute. I thought this was papism was supposed to make all this easy.
Makes it clear for the layperson, right? But in Casti Connubii 104, we read, as I said, that it is not the duty or power of the individual private judgment of the Christian and of his human reason to decide what things he's going to believe that are put forth and decreed by the Roman See. And it's not his, you can't limit that to what you think is just the extraordinary. So again, the universal ordinary magisterium, according to Vatican I, is clearly included under the promise of the charism of Peter. So you have to follow the Roman See in all of its decisions. And the only time that you can reject it is if it's not part of the universal magisterium or the Pope's private opinion. But again, there's no way for actually a list of when or where that is. It's vague things like what we always taught and faith and morals. Okay, well, faith and morals can conceivably encompass anything within the Christian tradition, right? So it's intentionally kind of vague because then it allows for the individual Catholics from a practical perspective to make Catholicism any wide range of things from Urban II calling crusades to Mother Teresa, saving, street people. So it's whatever, or praying in mosques, right? It leaves it so open and so vague, right? But at the same time telling you that you have to follow Vatican I in the way that it says what dogma is, right? And so the point of all that is just to say that the whole position of the Society of St. Pius X is itself untenable and schismatic on its own grounds because it results in them deciding that they will not accept the universal ordinary magisterial teaching, which includes the living papacy, includes the living magisterium. So in other words, you can't just say, well, I'll go back to this pope. No, it's a living succession. You can't reject the last 60, 70 years of what the papacy has taught. That's ludicrous. And obviously clearly flies in the face of Vatican I. So it's not just a matter of which documents, it's are you following the living pontiff and successor of Peter, you see. So all of these specious arguments that the Society of St. Pius X tries to use falls apart when we look at the fact that Vatican I tells, no, you can't reject the universal ordinary magisterial teaching. By the way, you don't even have the ability to publicly reject just the ordinary teaching. In fact, classic Catholic moral theology teaches that even the fallible ordinary magisterial teaching must be submitted to with docility. So even though you can privately think that it's wrong, you don't have to agree with it. Maybe your bishop says this on that and you disagree with him. That's allowable in Catholic theology. But the problem is that you don't have the right to publicly oppose and disagree with the church, right? That's not really the ethos of Roman Catholicism, right? And that's why there's always this dialectic. And yeah, they're going to appeal to, well, there's been many saints in the church who fought, corrupt hierarchs and who did this and that. Yeah, but prior to Vatican I, you might have been able to have that opinion. Vatican I has settled the issue. The Roman See cannot fail. It does not defect. And that includes his universal ordinary magisterial teachings, which includes the liturgical rites and decisions that the Roman See makes.
Yeah. To go forward on what you said,
One quick point before you go. A clear illustration of this is in the fact that, for example, when I was attending the Latin Mass, the SSPX, back in, say, 2005 or 6, it was a hot topic that many of us thought John Paul II is going to be canonized. Well, John Paul II at that time, right, was still Pope and was not, I think that was around the time he was still Pope. I don't remember the exact year that Benedict came in. I don't know if it was 2007, 8, somewhere in there. But at that time, John Paul, it looked like, right, there was a large move to have his canonization. And I remember explicitly, I had a big discussion with the SSPX priest that I attended at that time, Father Gregory Post, by the way. That's all true. He's since passed away. But Father Gregory Post made it very clear that Rome will never canonize John Paul II. It's an impossibility because they cannot canonize heretics. Well, I told him at the time, they're not just going to canonize John Paul II. They're going to canonize Paul VI, John the 23rd. They're all going to get canonized. That will be part of the process of making it undeniable that you have to accept Vatican II. Now, at that time, the SSPX was constantly debating, do we have to accept the canonizations of popes? Well, you do. I'm sorry. They're part of the ordinary magisterial teaching. The doctors of the Roman Catholic Church say that canonizations, Alphonsus Liguori says that they're part of the universal ordinary magisterial teaching. So they're infallible. You have to accept those. You can't just think how silly it would be to sit here as a Roman Catholic and say, well, if I can reject those canonizations, I can start rejecting them all. I can go back. I don't accept Augustine's canonization. I don't accept Jerome. You see how silly this would be if in the Roman Catholic system you could doubt and reject canonizations. So the canonizations of the Vatican II popes is a further illustration of the fact you do not have a right as a Roman Catholic to reject Vatican II. It is not a merely pastoral council that is not magisterial. In fact, we're going to look at John the 23rd's opening, opening the council, Paul VI statement on the council, and they show very clearly it's part of the magisterial teaching. He reckons it as the new ecumenical council. He says that it is confirmed with all of the full apostolic Petrine authority necessary to make it a magisterial council. So it's just simply a lie that the Roman Catholics tell themselves. It's a fiction, it's a trad myth that you have the right to reject Vatican II or any of the papal decisions about the liturgy after Vatican II. Go ahead.
So you were saying that the papacy always act within this gray area and subtlety, and that's something we see here in another way of sense. Many people are saying, "Oh, the Trad Mass is gonna die." No, I think it's gonna be more subtle and maybe worse. Because just a rite dying or being fully cancelled tends to wake up people. What's going to happen is that it's going to be slowly phased out, and we can see that, for example, in order for Latin masses to continue, they have to be confirmed by bishops, and we know that the bishops are over time named by the Pope, so over time you will have less of them. And if you want to establish new Latin masses, they're going to have to be vetted not only by the bishop but also by the Holy See. So that's Rome.
Exactly.
So this will just drastically reduce it, as there's a priest that can teach a Latin Mass sadly pass away. And I think that ultimately it's never going to fully die, but it's going to be reduced to this vegetative state that you can see of other masses. For example, during the reforms of Trent, some masses that were sufficiently traditional were still allowed, but only locally, in a reduced state. And that's why you have, for example, the rite of Milan, you have the rite of Lyon, and you have some other ones. So I think that over time it's going to become a museum rite, pretty much. And you can see that it's going this way with what is probably the most violent part of this motu proprio. That is when the Pope says that the lex orandi, so the law, the truth that is communicated by the liturgy, is exclusively belongs to the Novus Ordo when it comes to the Latin rite.
Yep.
So the Tridentine Latin Mass, in a sense, doesn't really have this representative teaching authority, which begs some question as to its value.
Well,
so
let me comment on that, because this is actually another problem within the world of Roman Catholicism, and it's the decree of Pius V, quo primum. So this is a huge part of the debate. It's the 1570 decree. I'm going to put it in the chat for those that are interested. And this is one of the key documents for trad Catholics, right? Because the argument is that, well, look, this apostolic constitution, right, relates to the fact that the Tridentine Mass for the trad Catholic is the Mass. That's it. There is no other Mass. That is the Mass. And the argument is that Pius V decreed this in perpetuity, such that it is worded as if this can't be rescinded, it can't be done away, it can't be nullified. You can't start up or create a new Mass. Okay, that's the argument of any typical trad who's a Latin Mass going trad, whether they're Sedevacantists, whether they're SSPX, or whether they're a diocesan Latin Mass or whatever, FSSP. Everybody will refer to this document. It's a key part of the debate. Now, the reason I bring it up is that the irony is that it both the triads are both right and wrong, and the Novus Ordo papal followers of Francis are right and are wrong. Both groups have an element of correct, and both groups have an element of wrong. Because when you read Quo Primum, it is worded like, by his full apostolic authority for all time, for perpetuity, the Roman Missal can't be altered or changed. This is the Mass. So we're not interested in debating that itself, whether or not the Pope had the ability to do that. But within the Roman Catholic system, that's what Quo Primum says. However, as you just saw in these other statements and these other documents, right, it's clear that the Roman Pontiff, especially at Vatican I, determines what tradition is. Okay, if you read Vatican I, especially Session 4, and thank you, shout out to Orthodoxy Caloric Queen for that $100 fat super chat there, where he notes that Session 4 of Vatican I, sections 3 and 4, says very clearly that it is the Pope not with the cardinals, not with the rest of the church, who determines what tradition is. No one judges the Holy See. You don't tell the Pope what tradition is. The Pope, in his office as successor to Peter, determines what the true sense of tradition is. He is the deposit keeper, right? The key holder. He's the one who transmits, as the universal pastor and teacher, the faith. So he is the living embodiment also of tradition. That's clearly the sense that Vatican I has. And by the way, if you disagree with that, that's actually excommunicated. You're excommunicated if you reject that or disagree with that in the decrees of Vatican I. So the point is that both things are true. Quo Primum does define the Roman Missal at Trent to be in perpetuity. That is the Latin Mass. But because the Pope is above tradition, he's not bound by it. He determines and interprets it. You don't interpret it for him and tell him what he has to do. No man can judge the First See in these matters. Then it's also true that the Roman Pontiff can decree a new liturgy. He can do what happens at Vatican II, because Vatican I gives him that right and that authority to determine these matters. So it's not a matter of making the system work. It's a matter of realizing that this system is inherent and fraught with contradictions.
I was just going to say that, yeah.
And I think this is what really ultimately happens when your institution is, because one thing I can give to the Roman Catholic Church is that as an institution, it's long lasting. It's not that bad as an institution. It has survived for a long time, but it's not a divine institution. It is an institution in the sense of just something that exists. And things like this is what happens when you depart from what really makes you, which is tradition, scripture, and the faith, ultimately speaking. Because in a lot of these questions, some might ask and wonder, well, how do the Orthodox solve this problem, right? It is because, first of all, and I think this is a very interesting point, is that for us, the fullness of the church subsists in each Orthodox church, whereas in the Roman Catholic system, the fullness of the church subsists only in Vatican. This is a massive difference in understanding.
Decentralized. Why can't you understand this?
Why is it so hard to? That's why if a see goes, a patriarch goes corrupt, it doesn't affect Orthodoxy.
And the apostolic continuity allows us to keep what was existing, right? We have a living tradition rather than what one man defines tradition. I mean, when I listen to these statements from Vatican I, from like this talk even, I just get shocked. I mean, I just can't believe how can one man can even define these things by itself. These are things that really no person can define. These are things that are alive. So I think this kind of speaks to the massive difference in approach, because for a lot of people, especially for, very autistic people like me, we like reading books and we like reading the rules so we can understand them. That's the way we kind of operate. But Orthodoxy has that, through the councils, but it also has the living tradition in the liturgy and in the prayers. And I think this kind of aspect being forgotten is really the root cause in all of these things, in my opinion. I think when you read Saint Athenagoras of Athens, this is really interesting. He differentiates the Christian religion from the pagan speculative philosophy, basically saying that we have the prophets, we have the living tradition of the prophets, whereas all of you people, sure, you have your philosophers, but it's not alive. It's just a bunch of books, right? You don't really live the teachings of those philosophers that you have, whereas we have the prophets and we live by their teachings and the fulfillment of those teachings. This is how he kind of differentiates himself from pagan philosophers. And I think today this is really how we differentiate ourselves from other religions ultimately as well. And this is why I so regularly see a lot of Roman Catholics, the way they argue is so different. The mindset is so different now. They're completely forgotten the first millennium mindset, and they've just adopted everything we have in the second millennium, it's first millennium but better. That's the kind of mindset they have now. And the only thing I've never seen, for example, I've never heard a Roman Catholic use a first millennium saint in their argument unless it is to prove the papacy or sacerdotalism and Eucharist. I haven't seen them cite any fathers in the first millennium for any other reason, personally. And I think
95%
this is an illustration
of
of that.
Don't read the fathers or know what they actually said or taught unless it's to find a papal quote mine. That's really all they think the fathers are.
Yeah, or a quote mine against a Protestant, like the Eucharist again, or priests and bishops.
Well, we've said that before, that the problem is a problem of the way that you think, the way that you've gotten yourself to think. But what you see in Rome and other places is to start with a later historical statement, and use that as your epistemic first principle to reread everything, which is what causes people to quote mine and try so hard to build these cases. And I was also thinking when you're speaking too, one of the reasons why a system is fraught with contradictions is because it doesn't match up with reality, right? Isn't that what always kind of produces contradictions in systems and paradigms?
Absolutely. Now, to be clear, first thing that I want to link is, now this one thankfully is in English. A couple of these you do have to stick in to translate, or you can Google around and it takes a while and you can find the English translations. But this is the opening statement of that one. I think is the John the 23rd one, isn't it? So this is the opening speech of, it's supposed to be the link. Yeah, that link in the chat there is, I'll put these into the links, by the way, at the show description. And I'll have the links to everybody else's channels too. I wasn't exactly sure who was going to join today, but so again, we want to stress that one of the things that's often the refuge, and I'm stressing this because I know the mindset of traditional Catholics. I know how they think. I know that when they encounter these kinds of problems that they see in Rome, the initial response is, the default mode is to always say, well, I don't have to accept that because that's not magisterium. I don't have to accept the decisions of Rome on liturgies, disciplines, jurisdictions, even though I just listed in Denzinger where it says you do. I don't have to listen to Vatican II because I've heard people say it's a pastoral council. Okay, pastoral council does not mean that it's not magisterial or dogmatic. Okay, this should be a no-brainer. So there's the link right there. Pope John the 23rd's opening speech to the council, Vatican II, makes it very clear that this is a continuation of the ecumenical councils. It's a council confirmed with full apostolic authority for the entire church, dealing with faith and morals, obviously. And it's confirmed by the apostolic see. And he even uses the word magisterial in there. So the notion that Vatican II, because Paul VI in some phrase said it's a pastoral council and didn't pronounce judgments, he's just talking about the fact that it doesn't have excommunications. It says nothing about it not being dogmatic. He says it didn't produce new dogmas in the sense that it wasn't saying something new, like each ecumenical council. It's supposed to be a summation council, right, that aligns with the spirit of the world, supposedly, the aggiornamento. Well, in fact, that has nothing to do with its dogmatic status. I mean, it's included in the Catholic Catechism. The decisions of Vatican II are taught to every Catholic throughout the entire world in the Catholic Catechism right there. And when we look at the opening statement of John the 23rd, he says it is part of the magisterium. When we look at the decision of, or the opening speech of Paul VI, here's the opening speech of Paul VI. Paul VI also includes the notion of it being magisterial and dogmatic. There's that link. There's another one from Paul VI, an audience to the cardinals, I think, in 1976. So this is a separate one. Makes it very clear that the reforms and teachings of Vatican II are dogmatic. Francis himself has stated the liturgical reforms of the second the second Vatican Magisterial Council. I guess you can combine that as the Vaginal Council. The second Vatican Magisterial Council.
It gave a new
Dude,
birth,
I've had the
man.
best flub ups this last week, right, with the vocab Malone thing. Yeah. So for those that are interested, we did actually do. I did a whole stream, I think, with Snek on this very thing, and it includes all the links below that. So I'll give you here's that live stream if you would just want to go watch that separately, so I don't have to repeat everything that's in that live stream. But it has all the links below it. And you can go watch that there to see it demonstrated very clearly that even according to Francis, Vatican II is magisterial. So we can't have a refuge in saying, oh, well, I'm just not going to follow. I don't accept those as magisterium.
I mean, at that stage, what do you even follow, right?
Well, it's up to each private Roman Catholic's individual decisions. And as we saw, Casti Connubii, paragraph 104, says that you don't have the right as a Roman Catholic to decide what you are going to pick as the magisterial teachings and what are not. That's not your decision to make. Yeah.
And I just saw this in the Discord. Someone said that in the, should we say, I don't know, some guy, one of these Tradcaf streams, the big Tradcaf guys, one of the particularly unintelligent ones, he's opened up with this stream saying that this is worse than the Babylonian captivity and Avignon papacy. I mean, that's how bad it is for them.
Well, at that
apparently.
point, I would ask just very simply, the key issue here is not debating the infallibility or fallibility of this and that claim and statement. The issue is indefectibility, because what's implicit in Matt Fradd and all these people's admissions is that Rome has defected. I mean, that's what the SSPX de facto position is, even though they still want to be in communion with the Roman See. They are essentially admitting the Roman See has defected and dogmatically taught error for the last 70 years, 65 year, whatever it is. Okay, well, then Rome has defected, right? And Vatican I is very clear. Rome cannot defect.
Cannot defect.
Yeah, correct. Another point that's going to be interesting is, obviously it's a classic unity. If anything, this declaration has proven that, this didn't bring unity, even though it was the main goal. And I think it would be interesting to cover the position of some groups within Roman Catholicism and how we can expect them to evolve from this. You've already covered the SSPX. The SSPX is probably one that will see an influx of people at first, because people will want to keep the Latin Rite. But this motu proprio de facto abrogates the previous one by Benedict XVI, which allowed for this rapprochement between Vatican and the SSPX. So over time, it will be evidently clear that there's a schism. So more people might go there, but I think at the end, their position will be basically a sedevacantist one. They will be fully in schism.
Yes.
The second
Do you-
group.
Do you anticipate any of them like trying to become uniates?
I was going to cover that.
Oh,
So the second group that's very interesting is quote unquote rallied fraternities. So the SSSP and so on. So these people are more formally accepting of Rome, but still held the Latin Mass. So basically, there were a middle ground. So the SSPX light, basically.
Yeah.
And these no longer have a role. And I'm not sure that they will be reconfirmed, because the main idea was to move these people away. So these groups really don't know where they are, and many of them will maybe migrate to the SSPX for a time, or maybe try to adapt to the Novus Ordo, because that's going to be difficult.
Yeah.
Then within the Novus Ordo accepting people, you have people who will adopt a sort of recognize and resist, reform the reform. Basically, they're gonna do what McDonald's does with the McRib, but just with Tridentine Mass. It's just gonna be back, and everybody gonna rush for it, and then it's gonna go away again, and so basically, it's just gonna flip flop. And I'm seeing the way Rome is taking. I really doubt that this position is tenable, even in the short to middle term. So that's a problem. And then you have people that are Novus Ordo affirming, that want to be in Rome, but don't necessarily want to participate to this. And I think some of them, be it from the SSPX or from the Novus Ordo, and we see that, many apologists that are traditional minded, and will tell you to absolutely submit to the Pope, they will still seek refuge to the Eastern rites. And I think there will be this exodus to the Eastern rites.
Can I comment on that? Because one thing that's a misunderstanding here that a lot of Roman Catholics have, which is they think that if they go to Eastern rites, they're going to find some haven of conservatism, and that's actually sadly not the case. And so this is a big downer that a lot of trads discover when they go to the Uniate churches, is that there's a lot more liberalism and ecumenism in a lot of the Uniate churches than they expected. And even the liberalization of the liturgy, unfortunately for them, has spilled over into Uniate churches and Uniate celebrations of the liturgy. So that's a big misconception too, that when they get there, they're actually going to find out that it's not what they expected. I also want to add too that so what this really does is kind of put the church back into a position, the SSPX, I should say. Oh, there's too much cocaine in here. That's what the trads are going to say. Anytime I sneeze, they say that they caught me snorting all the cocaine in here. But and when I get these old books out, these old dusty books, I start sneezing. Anyway, so I was in the SSPX before Benedict put out the motu proprio. And so what happened was you have this kind of parallel structure of episcopate operating under, outside of the jurisdiction of the local diocese. So basically, if you go to Memphis or you go to Nashville, there's an SSPX chapel that's not under the jurisdiction of the local, Roman Catholic canonical in communion with Rome bishop. So they have their own sort of bishops that are a parallel ecclesiastical structure that just say they're in communion with Rome, even though they're not, from Rome's vantage point, in full communion. Now, I say all that because what the intention, as Francis says, of the motu proprio was to reconcile these people back to normalized status and so-called full communion, and that didn't ultimately happen. So there was a long time brewing schism within the SSPX between almost quasi moving in the direction of sedevacantist guys and then Bishop Fillet and those people who wanted to actively sort of bring the SSPX back into full union with Rome. So there's always been a kind of division within the SSPX. I saw it myself there. I argued with many of the people who took, because I leaned in obviously in the more sedevacantist minded view of that. So even when I eventually decided to be Seda, I still attended SSPX masses for as long as I could before they asked me to stop attending, because I thought it was valid mass. So, as long as I'm going where there's a valid mass, it's going to work. But all of that just to say that what this does is put the SSPX back into a position prior to the motu proprio where they're just going to move back into doing that parallel ecclesiastical structure, which again confirms that they are in fact in schism. Again, Francis says it. He says it's a schism. So you know how Francis views the SSPX. It's not even in question. And one last point, again, on Francis. Here is the document, again, that I mentioned. There's a series of these. I'm just giving the ones that are most accessible and clear. This is Francis in 2017 giving a speech and illustrating, and this is why we know that what happened was already anticipated in 2017. Francis gave this speech on National Liturgical Week, August 2017, the Paul VI Audience Hall, where he said, "The liturgical reforms of Vatican II are irreversible and magisterial." He's very clear and very precise in the document that I just linked. So Francis already told you in 2017 he was going to do this.
Yeah, quick word before I get myself some green tea. About the unit, I think that there's another problem that you mentioned. The entire point of this motus proprio by Francis was to limit dissenting voices, and the units have been pretty happy because their rite is safe. It's not touched by this, but if all the dissidents move to the uniates and adopt the...
Yeah, but they're gonna find that the uniates are just as liberal and ecumenist, and even more liberal and more ecumenist than a lot of their Latin Mass circles. So that they're in for a rude awakening is all I'm trying to say.
I mean, the whole aspect is ecumenistic.
Yeah, of course. They need to say, oh, actually, you can be a Palamist, and you can be all these kind of things. But what I'm saying is that even if they manage to find refuge there, and we know of people who found refuge there. I think Matt Fred did, because he, for instance, in Novisodo, if the dissonant move to the unions en masse, they're gonna be the next to get bonked.
I was thinking that too. Yeah.
So that's something that might gonna happen as well, because the entire point was to reduce dissent. If they're just gonna migrate the problem, even the units, right, which probably would be the more traditional once the Latin Mass is phased out, are gonna get gutted as well. So that's something
I just wonder.
Really worried about.
I just wonder. Imagine being a trad calf in America, and the only two choices you have is a Novus Ordo parish with a Dixie cut, haircut, 60-year-old aunt woman giving you the communion, and the other option you have is the Chaldean rite, which venerates Nestorius and Theodore of Mopsuestia, like Nestorian heretics. I mean, what decision do you make then at that stage? I mean, this is the kind of it's kind of funny when that's becoming more and more of a reality. I mean, Chaldean rite is pretty minor, but I mean, you can extend it to other uniate parishes. And as I've said before, and as was pointed out, I mean, the whole idea of uniatism is just very ecumenistic, especially in its current form, in many different ways.
Another point too is that one thing that I noticed when I was going to the Latin Mass, I guess you could say it's a Latin Mass. The Latin Mass was that it was it was almost in a way a kind of an idol, and I say that because one thing that I heard Sedevacantists make, there was actually a good argument, and I think John Pontrello, a good friend of ours, who brings this up in his book, because some people may think, well, maybe the Sedevacantism is an option too, which I'm going to mention why it's not an option here in a second. But he pointed out that, and others have pointed out that the Mass is one element of the faith, right? And it's not literally identical to the totality of the faith. And so to treat the Mass like it's this sort of magical thing that's going to fix the church, like, oh, if we just do the Mass, if we just keep doing the Latin Mass, this will somehow magically fix the church. That's the mindset of a lot of trad SSPX type Catholics. that's not actually I mean, the faith is more than just doing the liturgy. The faith is actually professing the dogmas, right? I mean, this is for Roman Catholics more so what the faith is, because you can have the faith and be martyred without having access to a mass, right? There's the catacomb church for the Roman Catholics. There's the idea of the recount Catholics who didn't have mass. Well, I mean, this is actually an argument that Sedevacantists make, right? When Henry VIII instituted the reforms that were illegitimate, there was all the Catholics in England that had to go underground, right? Go to English houses, and you see they have things like the priest hole, which is these little places where they would hide priests, because a lot of times they couldn't have mass, right? And the point is that they understood that the faith is first and foremost. Not even the mass is first and foremost, because yes, it's an expression of the faith. It's something that you have to do, but you can keep your faith even if the state bans the mass, right? Even if there's a catacomb church. And so Sedevacantists often point to this, and it's relevant because the Roman Catholic Church is ultimately hinging on the papacy. That's the whole point of Vatican I. So you can't hinge your everything on just having a Latin Mass and doing a Latin Mass. And that's literally what they do. I'm telling you, I know from experience for years of doing this, you go to the Latin Mass and you just huddle down and you ignore Rome. But Vatican I does not allow you to huddle down, worship the Mass, and ignore Rome. You can't do that. It's not the way that system works. Father Deacon, could I ask you a question?
I think he's not here.
Oh, did he have to go?
Father Deacon, unfortunately, is not with us anymore, sir. Sorry.
No, I would add to thank you for David has a video that he just did. I shared it on my community tab, so you could look at the community tab.
Thank you.
And you'll see that David gave some of his comments. I know.
Yeah.
What's some of the?
It's always these videos that make a lot of views. Like that's one of the things that's kind of cool because you get a lot of views. But it's also one of the things that I kind of regularly complain about sometimes. It's that videos like this, it gets a lot of attention because it's news buzz, but because that's what people in the religious world is more like. They care about the kind of drama, right? But they don't seem to be interested anymore, especially trads. But I think religious people in general today, they're not really interested in the truth theology aspect of it.
You're not interested you're not interested in the second vaginal council.
Yeah, I mean, I just kind of, when was the last time since I seen a trad cat, for example, make a astute theological lengthy argument? Really, the last time I remember was one of them defending heart worship. That's the last time I saw one. I've never seen. Have you noticed that they don't deal with theology anymore? That's not in their interest field anymore. Because
they've taken a lot of hits. I mean, Francis is the gift that keeps on giving. He basically just hands us a monthly scandal by which he becomes the greatest Orthodox apologist of all time.
So I was just saying,
yeah, pretty much.
Him and Matt Slick might just be the best Orthodox apologists we have out there.
Is Matt Slick better than you?
I have a question for you.
Yes, sir.
Maybe you could word this well, because I'm having a hard time finding the right words for this. I kind of suspect that given a lot of the interactions I've had with various Roman Catholic apologists and Thomists, is that one reason they might not find our argumentation or approach here convincing might have to do with their foundationalist approach to well, we just look at this piece of evidence. Well, if you don't like that, then look over here at this piece of evidence. And they're not looking at the fact that if the system is at a fundamental level contradictory, the pieces of evidence aren't going to work to make the system work. Do you see?
I was actually thinking about that when we were speaking earlier, that one of the kind of the foundationalist evidentialist approach is the assumption that we all see things the same way. And
we don't need to interpret the documents. And then they'll talk about
well, we just look at
interpretation.
And also, if you're in that mode of thinking, you don't analyze things in terms of paradigms and like what we bring up with coherentism arguments. Not that we're coherentists, but that they have valid arguments that everything's theory laden. and contaminated by these ideas. Now, if you don't train yourself to kind of think that way, then all things kind of look equal, right? It's like, well, I think that's one of the reasons why they really, well, you have problems too, or
that's what I wanted to get your take on that, you guys too, because the most common cope response I've seen is, well, you guys have Elpidophorus, you guys have Ecumenists, you guys have bad patriarchs.
Yeah.
That's right, the number one argument that we've seen back, especially Lofton loves this. He thinks it's some kind of like knockdown argument.
Yeah,
but, I mean, if we hinged everything on one guy, I guess that would be a good argument, but it's not.
We do not have a dogmatic belief in the indefectibility of the titulacy of Bursa. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Now, I live in Turkey. I live here, and
so
I know some of them, and there's not many in Bursa, so well, I mean, jokes aside, I'm sorry for cutting you off, Father Deacon, but my opinion, my take on this, I think it's just that because these people are stupid, like they just don't care. I think that's
of them for sure,
the reason they give. Like, I think this idea, I mean, this kind of approach is also very stupid, I think, in my opinion, because it's based on, you just look at evidence and you just analyze it according to your own personal beliefs rather than looking at systems. Yeah, it doesn't make really any sense. It's just, I mean, at that stage, you might as well make up your own religion. Yeah, if you're having that approach.
I'll remind everybody, I mean, this is essentially what happened in the Ibarra debate. If you go back and watch that from a couple of years ago, where everybody was so worried that I was being mean, as again, the whole point of me hopping
no, Jay, you're too
the whole
mean.
Point of me hopping on that stream was because Eric had said, Jay won't debate, when I'd asked Eric for years to come and do a debate, but what they meant was I won't debate according to their terms on reason and theology. And so I finally just said, okay, look, I'll hop on here right now and we can have this talk. And it ended up in that heated discussion. And if you go back and listen to the debate, if you follow all the way to the end, my point is about the system. I keep making system-wide, systemic, presuppositional critiques, and Eric doesn't understand what a presuppositional systemic critique is, and so he just keeps responding with, well, what about this piece of evidence? Well, what about this piece of evidence? And my point is that you have a system by which you cannot, on the one hand, believe Vatican I, and then turn around and pick and choose what things and when you believe the Roman See has and hasn't defected, right? So it doesn't work to say, well, I believe that in the indefectibility of the Roman See until he defects. That's essentially where they end up.
And notice they argue by piecemeal.
That's what I'm saying.
You've got to refute each thing, but all it takes to refute somebody is to show there's inherent contradictions and inconsistencies within the system.
Yes.
So, I mean, and it's ridiculous because otherwise you'd have to go through in this kind of inductive way. So you really think I have to go through every proposition?
Every document in church history, so you could never argue anything, right?
Yeah, but there is this kind of mindset too. And the other thing with this kind of evidentialism too is it doesn't appreciate that. Again, it just thinks that, well, there's only kind of one way of approaching reality.
Yeah, you just look at it and see what it says, right?
Now, the problem with that, you see this revealed all the time, that they don't even realize that they're committed to a particular branch of metaphysics that's been critiqued. And what are they obsessed with? Well, wait a minute. How does the Orthodox Church answer on particular moral or sexual issues or reproductive issues or something like that? Oh, it's all uncertain, right? Well, no, it's not uncertain. But what we don't have is the same epistemic standards and system that you do that would require, again, every little thing has to be defined and given, which doesn't do anything for you anyways, because as we shown as well, in terms of ordinary magisterium, it's left open vague enough that you could basically fill in whatever you want. And then anytime it disagrees, you'd be like, well, obviously that wasn't part of the teaching that was always held, and which is a typical tactic that people use in politics too, right? Keep the terms and concepts vague enough. Why? Because the purpose then is not to communicate information in an accurate way, but it's in terms of power.
It's to perpetuate the system. Yes.
Yes. It means that if you can pack in whatever you want, then they end up becoming spell words and to hold power over and preserve the system.
Yeah.
Which is you see it in politics, you see the same thing, which probably is no coincidence, right? Given the kind of blending of the two. Which is exactly what Metropolitan Seraphim calls out in his letter to the abysmal state of the.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, one of the and everything is being reduced to slogans. Like, for example, we see so many stupid, whether it's Thomas or whether it's crypto Latins or kind of like oh, your systematic approach is like presuppositionism. That's like Calvinism. Have you ever read a single patristic writing, dude? I mean, it's the systematic approach is in the fathers all throughout, and this is why I think kind of Orthodox argumentation on these things is the same thing. It's systematic approaches rather than, oh, you have this thing I don't like. Like a great example, another one is divorce. They always talk about divorce and remarriage as if it's this super debate ender, when even by itself is not. It is not. Okay, in the system, but even in the evidentialist sense, even in that sense, it's not a debate ender because it's in the pre-schism church. So I think I've kind of said this over and over again. I think the foundation of this is really the approach. They just moved away from the fathers so much when they see the representation of it in the modern day. There's a massive recoil because it's so foreign, I think, with a lot of these people, and it breeds this kind of stuff, right? Superstition. And I mean, we can talk about Tridentine Latin Mass being beautiful. I've seen apparently people are converted because it's beautiful, but at a certain stage you have to push aside those superstitious or womanly reasons and actually have proper manly reasons to be part of religion, other than, oh, beauty will save the world, oh, I'm just returning to tradition. Give me something better, man. Come on. Now, if you're not going to give me something better, then you're rejecting the tradition that you're supposedly returning to.
A couple reminders, because a lot of people may not even be aware of this. Now, Francis himself is pretty radical when it comes to what he accepts as liturgical liturgically proper, such that he has actually officiated himself when he was before he was Pope at clown masses and puppet masses. I will give you the link. The video is on my Twitter. I shared it again. So there's Francis at his Pinocchio puppet mass. I'm not joking, by the way. There's the link on my Twitter. And at the same time, too, keep in mind that at what David was just mentioning about the issue of divorce, this is like the number one go-to thing too. After you guys have problems and you guys don't have a pope, so you don't know any true dogmas. And oh, by the way, what about divorce? Here is Ubi's excellent essay in the chat showing the pre-schism church fathers admitting in terms of the flagellum about divorce and remarriage. There's even a papal decision made on this matter prior to the schism. I think I shared it. It's on my Twitter. So he's got two articles on marriage and divorce. I'm trying to find the other one on the Pope. Give me just... Anyway, go ahead. You guys can go ahead. I'll pull this up.
What are the arguments for these tango puppet clown mat? Like,
I think
I don't even know how you begin to like explain that away.
So there's like a medieval tradition of the fair, the festival. So sometimes they'll say, "Oh, you know, don't you see that this is like just the church allowing the local village to have the medieval festival, which had, I don't know, the Joker, the jester and the mime and all this nonsense." I mean, that's literally the only appeals I've ever heard. Why they want to, I mean, I almost think they're throwing it in you. I'm not trying to be rude to you Roman Catholics, but I mean, I think these clerics that, like cardinals that are dressing up like clowns, like I did in the show picture or the thumbnail. I mean, I think these people are throwing it in your face. I mean, I think that they think you're a clown if you believe this religion. I'm not trying to be mean to Catholics. I think that's the attitude of these wicked and oftentimes literally demonic cardinals who are entrapped in a lot of these pedo scandals. Do you remember which pope it was, Snek? One of the pre-schism popes made a ruling on.
Yes, there's a Council of Rome talking about this, but in that case, they might just be able to say, "Oh, but it's just a local council, and he wasn't poping properly."
Well, yeah, but they'll appeal to local Roman councils all the time.
So if you really want to make an argument, you should look at the canons of Saint Basil, which were applied in the East. And by the way, if you think they're lax, just try to follow them. And then not only they were applied the East, so that would be like the entire East having a wrong position, but they are enshrined in the Trullo Council, which itself is defined as ecumenical by the Seventh Ecumenical Council.
Yes.
So you'd have to give up this the Seventh Ecumenical Council, and you'd have to say, "Oh, actually," I think that's what FLA does. FLA is a Catholic historian. It says like, "Oh, actually, Rome never accepted any of the canons." Which if you're in charge, how come you don't accept any of the canons? But
by the way, Richard Price points out that the Trullo Council is a continuation of the Fourth Ecumenical Council, so it's not just accepted by the Seventh. It's actually is part of that lineage.
Yeah, correct. And there's also an excellent article on Ubi's website called like the Trullo Council was ecumenical in the West. It's pretty interesting. And yes, it was. We even have Pope bring up the canons of the council in the to defend against the iconoclast. So yeah.
So do we want to move to super chats? Is that we've been going for an hour and a half? I don't
know sure. I was just gonna make a comment on that divorce thing as well. It's already been done, but it's been both in the East and West. Saint Gregory the Theologian is actually one of the, aside from Saint Basil, he was one of the biggest kind of pushers for a reform in canon law for marriage to make it more lax. He's the kind of reason for that, and so you can't really talk trash about Saint Gregory. I know Roman Catholics, it's not beside them. In my Filioque video, where I mostly quote a Saint Gregory theologian, I've seen Roman Catholics call him a semi-Arian. I mean, it's this kind of stuff is not beside them, but for those who actually care about this kind of stuff, Saint Gregory theologian is kind of the foundational source for this. Saint Theodore of Canterbury in the West, in England, actually has various different canons for divorce. Other than adultery, one of them is impotence, for example. If your husband is impotent, then you as a wife can divorce him and marry another. Like there's straight up, it's in the penitentiary. So, it's a really bad argument, to be honest. Yeah. So I just wanted to make that point, and I don't really have much else to say.
I have a small comment to make, and this is going to be more of a plea than a comment. So to all the traditional-minded Catholic, be you from the SSPX or inside the Novus Ordo, we feel you, and this is a loss. This is a loss to the Roman tradition, and it's a loss to a part of our tradition, because that's something that we share. We share some aspects of the Western Rite, and you should seriously consider Orthodoxy, because at the end of the day, the main difference between you and us, between the ones that are looking at the Eastern Rite as well, is the papacy, and it is the one thing that is causing disunity. It is the one thing that is causing most of the division and the debates and the scandals in the Roman Church, and I'm really sorry for what's going to happen, because the worst part of all this is that people who you were working shoulder to shoulder with, the really papal supremacist people, they're going to be your own inquisitors, and they're not even going to let you mourn the phasing out of this rite. And you have people that are already jubilating. You have people that are thinking that the Pope destroying tradition proves that the papacy is supreme over it. This is I really don't know how to express this. It's really sad. And again, the church welcomes you. You can give this up. I've had some Uniate friends as well recently joining. We've had many people reaching out to us. This circle of going for more and more papalism to destroy the tradition, to erode the church fathers, to erode the councils, to erode all of this, just to maintain the papacy as the sole dogma, while it is simultaneously the main problem. Well, what causes all those problems and all the mental gymnastics and all this? That's not what Christianity is.
I forgot Francis also officiated at a tango mass as well as a puppet mass, so there's a double whammy there in that clip. Yeah, I think as I said at the beginning, I attended a Western Rite Rocor Divine Mass for the first time about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and it was really it was great, and it reminded me of my days in the SSPX going to the Latin Mass. But I actually enjoyed the fact that it was in the vernacular. So I mean, it was great. I mean, I don't know what else you could ask for if you're a Roman Catholic who wants to come to Orthodoxy but is not ready for Byzantine liturgy or whatever. I mean, go check out a Western Rite Rocor liturgy.
Yeah, and I mean, in 20 to 30 years, there's going to be more Western masses in the Orthodox Church than in the Roman Catholic Church, I think, with the way things are going. I genuinely believe that it might actually go to that direction. Well,
let's keep in mind, too, that one of the fallbacks that Roman Catholics have is, well, if I hunker down, I'll just wait for the based Pope. Hopefully, God will save us with a miraculous election of a based Pope. Maybe Cardinal, who's that? The brother man, the black dude. I forget his name. Cardinal
Sarah, who resigned.
Right. It's not going to be him. And by the way, Francis has been stacking the cardinalate with more of his own. So do not. That is a fool's hope. There, you're hoping on something.
And if you get that based Pope with those Francis cardinals, then there's something that's going on. Something's up. It's actually way worse. It's way more worrying if that happens, I think.
Can you imagine? So, and by the way, we've seen actually a progression. I mean, Francis has. So, if you know kind of the history of the post-Vatican II, the theological developments and the papacy, and if you read a lot of those encyclicals, you know that Francis is. I mean, John Paul took it far, right? I mean, he took it farther than anybody before him had. He was a light year leap in terms of things that nobody had ever seen before, with the Assisi gatherings, other world religions coming and praying in Roman Catholic churches, covering up the altar and crosses to respect voodoo practitioners. I'm not joking, by the way. Praying in mosques. John Paul did stuff nobody had ever seen before. And then, Benedict was this kind of like bureaucratic rollback. I don't actually believe Benedict was actually a conservative. You read his books. I mean, he's just as modernist as any of the others. I've read about 6 of Benedict's books. And so it gave the appearance of like a little bit of a rollback, and then you just take you take 10 steps forward, a little bit of a rollback, 2 steps back, and then you take another 10 steps forward. So that's how this bureaucratic Vaticanese works, is that you do this 2-step, right? And so, but I don't think that they're going to get a little bit of a rollback. They might after the time of Francis, but I wouldn't bet on it. And even if you do, can you imagine the next stage after Francis, what you're going to get? I mean, Francis took it to the light year level beyond what John Paul II had done. I mean, he's just done wild stuff. Anyway, so it's not that, it's not rocket science here. Vatican I makes very clear, strong statements about what will always be the case until the end of the world, not just until some vague time period, but until the return of Christ, about what constituent elements the Roman See must have and will have at all times until the end of the world. And so, again, the Sedevacantist thesis is not a tenable option either. We did a whole 3-hour stream on that, which I can link again. But if you've not seen that, if you want a book, our good friend John Pontrello has a great book on this. It's called The Sedevacantists Delusion, where he goes into detail explaining how Sedevacantism, just like the SSPX position, is not tenable in regard to Vatican I and what Vatican I says about the perpetuity of the Roman See, that it will have living successors until the end of the world. It can never lose its visible Roman Petrine office in terms of having an actual successor. It can't lose that. If it did, it would lose a lot. It would lose its very visible constituent components. It would not have the necessary components to ensure that perpetuity and indefectibility if Rome apostatized, right? The Roman See can't apostatize, according to Vatican I. It's very clear, right? So there you go. Super chats. We got Friendly Muslim for $5 says, is Christ God in human form? If he is, then how come only the Gospel of John portrays Christ as God? It doesn't. There are multiple statements about Christ's divinity in every gospel. This is a really low-tier, uneducated argument. Why isn't Christ declaring himself as God? He does. He does it all throughout the Gospel of John in every single chapter. I did a whole lecture through the entire Gospel of John. He also refers to his divinity in many places throughout the Gospels, right? Only God can forgive sins. In Mark, he forgives sins. So that's a declaration of his divinity, right? When we're told that Jesus is that John was the forerunner of the coming of Yahweh, Jesus is Yahweh. John was the forerunner to Jesus. I mean, look at the references in the Gospels to when Jesus is referred to as divine. So this is a bogus Muslim argument that they always appeal to.
John 8 is good, yeah. Before Abraham was I am is like just straight up.
By the way, even if the Gospel of John was the only one to declare the deity of Christ, that would be enough. But it's not the only one to declare the deity of Christ. The entire Old
Paul
Testament,
in epistles too.
The entire Old Testament declares the deity of Christ. I've done multiple hour streams on the Old Testament, the deity of Christ. This is my only obstacle to becoming Christian. Well, then go through my streams, and you'll see that that's no longer an obstacle. Yeah. Orthodoxy Chloroquine for $100 said. By the way, did anybody want to comment on that? You can. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I don't. I was just like adding stuff. John 8 is just great, but I think the entirety of Scripture, especially the Angel of the Lord stuff, was for me personally a huge one. Yeah. I think that the fact that there is a distinct person that manifests in the form of an angel, doesn't assume the angelic form, but manifests as that and has God's name in him. Yep. And the Old Testament elsewhere, what does it say about the name of God? It's the Lord. Right, Yahweh. So it's a divine title.
You can't give God's name to creatures, right?
Exactly. So it's an uncreated being. So that already is there.
And to this guy, I would say if you want an easy Old Testament example, read Zechariah 1 and 2. You will see the Father, the Son, and the Spirit. And read Ezekiel 1, 2, and 3, where you'll see the God, the Lord. You will see the one like a son of man who rides the chariot, who is the glory of the Lord, who is the word of the Lord, who is the voice of the Lord. Clearly, that's Jesus, and you will also see the Holy Spirit mentioned. All three holy persons are mentioned in Ezekiel 1, 2, and 3. Those are just two examples. There's dozens more examples, right? Chapters of Isaiah, 45, 65, I think, going from memory. Anyway, we have a whole stream where we cover this. I'll link that as well later on. Itchy Cornhole, $10. That's a gross name, dude. Real Cooter Brown, $7. Thank you for doing the stream today. There's a lot of information here. Thank you. Glad you enjoyed the stream. Aaron, the big black dude, $5. Viva la Tristana. Viva la Tristana de Resistance. Yes. Yes, absolutely. Your boy, $5. Thank you, your boy. He didn't say anything, though. The Palantir, $20. Could the Western Rite be a pathway into Orthodoxy for Roman Catholics attached to the traditional Latin Mass? Yeah, that's what it's there for. Would this help bring more converts or be detrimental overall? No. Again, I just went to a RoCore Western Rite Mass 4 weeks ago, and it was great. It was fine.
I mean, obviously, there's problems in the Western Rite, but I think general as a concept, first of all, it's good. It's part of the church. You can't really speak against it, in my opinion. I think if it kind of deals with excesses like heart worship and kind of the post-schism Western aspects of it, if you delete that, it's going to be great. But I think that's the minority in the Western Rite from what I've seen so far. I don't think it's the majority, at least in ROCOR Western Rite.
Yeah, I've only been to a ROCOR Western Rite. It seems like some of the problems in the Western Rite that deal with excesses or devotions that are not themselves acceptable in terms of Orthodoxy, like Sacred Heart, those tend to be in Antiochian
that's right.
parishes.
I haven't seen any in ROCOR. And it doesn't mean every Antiochian one's bad either. That with those, it just depends.
Okay, so
it's just like every other.
Orthodoxy chloroquine. I'm not trying. I got distracted. I wasn't trying to. So let me go back because I did reference it earlier, but he did send such a super fat super chat. He sent $100, which is awesome.
Wow.
And he says, as noted or as outlined in session 4, chapter 3 and 4 of Vatican I. The papacy is what determines what is and what is not tradition. If traditional Catholics appeal to anything beyond this scope of papal authority to deal with this issue, they are actually excommunicated as per Vatican I's decrees. Absolutely. Perfectly stated there, bro. I couldn't argue that any better.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the chat.
Thank you.
And I would add, if you're interested, be sure and follow these guys. Their links will be below. Father Deacon Dr. Ananias is on YouTube at Norwegian News. David is David the Real Med White. Snek, I will put the link to his Twitter. And then, of course, we have the Discord. We usually open up the Discord at least once a week and sometimes more than once a week to people who would like to come and debate. That's Protestant, Roman Catholic, atheist, Muslim. You're all welcome to come and offer your arguments. I will give people the floor. You can have as long as you want, within reason, to propose to me whatever arguments you'd want, whatever arguments you think are the best. That's the way we do it in the Discord. Now, if you come to the Discord, we typically require that you do come to the VC to debate. You can't just troll. You can't just spam stuff. You have to come and do, typically speaking, we require people to come and do voice debate. I may be in there this evening after the show. I don't know who else may or may not be there, but here is the Discord. You can come and join us. I think we had a Protestant guy who messaged me earlier saying that he might come and discuss and debate the canon. He wants to talk about how the canon came to be. He thinks that, I don't know where he got this, but he thinks Jesus gave him the canon. So that might be an interesting debate, but he may not show up. We never know. There's the Discord link. You can come join us. And I'll leave it to you guys if anybody else.
We're only 4 members short of 7,000. By the way,
we are right at 7,000. So I'm sure after that we will surpass 7,000 within the next few minutes. But anything else? Anybody want to leave us with anything?
No, it's pretty nice. We covered a lot as usual.
Snek and David and Jay. That's great.
All right. Well, thank you guys, and we will be back Monday. If you keep in mind, I think we're going to do Monday. So Ubi Petrus and Lewis wanted to do a stream on this topic. They weren't able to make it tonight, but I'm sure Ubi will have a lot of content. I think, if I recall, Ubi has a background also like me going to the Latin Mass, so he will have much more insight than we've offered tonight as well. He'll be able to come with a lot of the papal stuff. He's really one of the best at that for sure. So look for that Monday. We'll be talking with Ubi